who is Ismail Weiliang from Mott MacDonald, who will be telling us about delivering smart flood management in Bangkok. Ismail is a water engineer and an experienced in hydraulic modelling for local and overseas flood management projects. He is currently a flood modeller on the Bangkok Decision Support System flood management project, developing flood hazard maps and flood impact assessments to support sustainable and equitable urban development. Again, I just remind you all to continue to put in your questions into the Q&A and to continue to look at the other questions from others and to like the ones that you think you would like to hear answered, so that we have a good selection to pick from in the panel session towards the end of this morning's session. So anyway, over to Ismail.
Thank you, Kieran, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Good evening from Singapore. We're about 8 hours ahead of UK. My name is Ismail Weiliang. I'm a water engineer at Mott MacDonald, Singapore. So it's lovely to be here. I would like to first thank the organizers for choosing our paper and giving us the privilege to share about it. I would also like to thank all of who are with us online for spending your morning to listen in. I hope the sharing would be of benefit to you. So I'll be sharing on a project that we are currently working on, which won't be possible without our teams across the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, Japan, and Singapore, delivering smart flood management in Bangkok. So Shala McGavock, who headed the flood study, will be here as well for the panel discussion, but I'll be the one sharing the project. So cities around the world are experiencing flashy floods, which will increase in frequency and intensity with climate change. And Singapore experiences this too, UK as well. And this makes smart flood management more pertinent for resilient cities. Next slide, please. So I'll first introduce to you our client's challenge. Bangkok is subject to intense localized rainfall during their monsoon season. The rainfall also has high spatial and temporal variability, which makes it challenging to accurately predict rainfall and flooding. Severe surface water flooding occurs annually, and for the operational response is usually reactive. This causes health and social issues, especially for the most vulnerable, such as older persons and people with disabilities. It also causes direct damages to infrastructure, and the main problem highlighted by BMA, Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, which who deals with this flooding, would be traffic disruption. So based on all of these drivers, a flood resilience intervention was developed through a series of workshops between the city stakeholders in Thailand and FCDO, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, because this project is under the Global Future Cities program funded by the UK government. So imagine UK's recent floods, but these floods are happening every year. Next slide, please. So what if we could predict rainfall and flooding? I hope you enjoy the video we made for this presentation. Next slide, please. Or you can shift to the video. You may share the slides again. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll go through the project right now. So with Mod McDonald's domain experience and digital expertise, we deliver social and economic and environmental value by connecting innovations to outcomes, giving our client real-time insights, all powered by our digital solutions platform, Moata. Next slide, please. We have developed a global first real-time surface water flood forecasting decision support system to accurately predict where, when, and how much rainfall and flooding will occur, and hence allow our client to respond better to flashy floods that are increasing in frequency and intensity with climate change. Next slide, please. So the intervention developed was a pilot flood management DSS, decision support system, delivered to BMA as a proof of concept. I'll give you a brief of what our teams across the world are doing for this intervention. Our flood modeling team across Australia, Singapore, and the UK developed a hydraulic flood model. This was used as the physical basis to develop a machine learning model. Our rainfall radar experts in New Zealand produced world-class rainfall estimates for monitoring and rainfall forecasting through asset optimization and digital innovation. Our data scientists in UK then applied machine learning to the traditional flood model that we did and use the rainfall nowcast as an input. This produced a groundbreaking surface water flood forecasting system, producing flood maps in seconds. Our flood experts across Singapore and UK are currently working closely with the Thailand team and are in the phase of developing practical recommendations on flood emergency responses, which consider the early warnings provided by the DSS. And lastly, our digital team across the UK and New Zealand brought it all together in Mod McDonald's digital twin platform, Moata, providing a flood management decision support system that enables Bangkok to prepare, respond to, and recover from surface water flooding. Next slide, please. So jumping right into the flood model development, I'll give you an overview of the pilot area. It is in the central northeast of the city, and it includes several flood watch areas identified by BMA. Yeah, these areas flood many times. So it's around 17 square kilometers, and like much of Bangkok, it's very flat, urbanized, and predominantly residential. It is bound by external canals, and its internal canals are gated and discharged by pumping. Next slide, please. So for the flood model development, we use two-flow, HPC, for the flood modeling. It is primarily a 2D direct rainfall model in which rainfall is applied across the urban land surface, enabling an accurate representation of storm water flooding mechanism and overland flow. The canals are represented in 2D, and the major elements of the drainage network, such as large road drainage pipes and pump stations, are represented as 1D features in the model. We used PDFs with information and made reasonable assumptions while validating it with the Department of Drainage and Sewage. The model outputs spatial flood information, including extent, depth, and duration of the flooding in the form of flood maps and animations. Next slide, please. As in all flood model developments, the model is also calibrated to represent previous flood events and validated against further events with data such as rainfall radar, canal levels, photos, and anecdotal information. Next slide, please. We also improved rainfall monitoring and forecasting as stormwater flood prediction is highly dependent on rainfall observations. BMA had already invested in C-band radar technology to produce QPE, quantitative precipitation estimation, but it was underutilized. Outputs were inaccurate and were only available in images, requiring interpretation. Hence, they were only used after the flood events and not for the flood warning. We partnered with Weather Radar New Zealand to do targeted data processing and analysis to improve these radar-derived QPE fields. Further enhancing true calibration with local monitoring using VPR, vertically profiling radar, and rain gauge data. This improvement produced world-class rainfall estimates and nowcasts that are 2 hours ahead. Next slide, please. So for our flood forecasting system, our UK data scientists used the traditional flood model previously produced and applied machine learning with the rainfall nowcast as inputs. This produced a groundbreaking surface water flood forecasting system, overcoming limitations of traditional hydraulic models. Next slide. Model run times to produce these flood maps were reduced from hours to less than a second, while retaining accurate flood predictions. Next slide, please. So the machine learning model and hydraulic model agree on the location, depth, and duration of the flood. Comparing the results from the machine learning model and the hydraulic model, we have the mean absolute error for the maximum depth of just 2 centimeters. Next slide. As you can see, the machine learning model in blue, and the top one, is very close to the hydraulic model results in red in terms of depth as well as start time for different rain events. Next slide, please. Our digital team across the UK and New Zealand brought it all together in Moata Smart Water, Mott MacDonald's digital twin solution. This provides a flood management decision support system that enables Bangkok to prepare, respond to, and recover from surface water flooding. We undertook a number of onboarding sessions with BMA staff and have tailored the dashboards to meet their needs. Next slide. The decision support system delivered in Moata Smart Water provides a single source of truth for the many city departments as it centralizes all available real-time data and forecast information. You might press the slide to give the effects. So real-time data and forecasts are displayed spatially and can be interrogated at any location across the city, allowing BMA access vast amounts of data in a user-friendly format. Real-time data such as rain gauge, radar, canal, road, and river data are included, and the forecasts for the rainfall and flood are 2 hours in advance and has a 10 minutes refresh interval. Forecast flood depths are to the nearest 10 millimeters, and forecasts are shown with animation for BMA to quickly understand how predictions are forecasted to occur without the need for judgment or interpretation. Flood alarms are then set up in the dashboards to alert BMA operational staff, enabling local governments to make informed flood response decisions before the flood occurs, seeing the unseen, staying one step ahead. So our project management and social team in Bangkok made the whole project possible, building strong and open relationships with our city stakeholders, ensuring the DSS prioritizes key vulnerable communities and infrastructure to enhance inclusive social outcomes. And right now, we're working with the city and REP consultants, RAB consultants, who are providing concept of operations which consider the warning provided by the DSS. Next slide. So what's next? The next step would be scaling this up across the city, bringing it into operational use for Bangkok's Flood Control Center. Further developments to the DSS may include extending forecast time to 6 hours, integrating more data streams such as SCADA data, river, coastal, or traffic and transportation systems integration. Bangkok is far from alone in these flooding issues that it experiences, and this pilot provides a proof of concept for cities all across the region and indeed the world. Next slide. It will enable flood resilient cities around the world to tackle flashy flooding that are increasing in frequency and intensity with climate change. And we are currently talking to others who are interested in this global first real-time surface water flood forecasting decision support system. Next slide. So one more. So for the Q&A, I'll be open to take questions, and we also have the Q&A during the panel discussion, and we also have Shala McGavock, who led the flood modeling, to take questions as well. Thank you so much for your kind listening.
Thank you very much, Ismail. That was very interesting and very much at the forefront, it sounds like. So thank you. Just again, a reminder, just please keep putting the questions in and liking others' questions. We're now going to take a short break. We were running a few minutes just behind time, but we're almost now spot back on time scale, which is excellent. So we're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. If we could come back, if you can go and get yourself a tea or a coffee, stretch the legs, whatever you need to do, for the next 10 minutes, and we'll start back at 11:45 with our final presentation before we move on to our panel discussion. So thank you very much. Anyway, we'll now move on to our panel discussion and to deal with the questions and answers and session. And I'd like to invite back all our speakers from this morning. Please. Unfortunately, our keynote speaker, Samuel Larson, is unable to join us as he had originally planned, so he won't be part of the panel session. But we are pleased to be able to invite a couple of additional people onto the panel. Firstly, Charlotte McGavock, who was mentioned earlier on by Ismail, I think, who's a hydrologist at Mott MacDonald. She's also been working on this flood risk modelling project in Bangkok, and also someone who'll be well known to very many of us UDGers over the years, Martin Osborne, who is head of profession at WSP, and Martin has been a perennial contributor to our conferences from the floor and from the speaking box many times over the years, and has done a lot of other sterling work for UDG over the years. So thanks for joining us. What I'll do is I've got a few questions before I go to the Q&As. I got one or two questions of my own that I'll maybe pose, and that these will probably be targeted a little bit to each speaker. But if anyone else wants to comment, I don't know how we'll get that. If you can put your hand up or something, I can see you and I can call you in on that basis. But if we kick off with Murray, and what is it? The rainfall is obviously a really key input for urban drainage planning, but there's many aspects of urban drainage and minor and major systems and different organisations all involved. And I've always wondered now, we've got a lot more intelligence, a lot more data to use, but do you think there is good consistency and guidance and practice of how you use it across different organisations to manage a flood risk management in terms of the holistic use? Or is that still a challenge for us, do you think? And Murray's not on my screen, I just noticed. So that was a good start. So I would tell you, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just look to Martin to see if, oh, Murray has just joined us. You can think about an answer. Murray, did you catch my question?
Just about. Sorry, there was a problem getting into the backstage area. If you could just summarize quickly.
Well, what I was just asking is that urban drainage covers lots of different organizations and different systems, and we've now got, historically and more currently with your research, and we've got a lot of guidance on the rainfall inputs, but how those are practically applied by different organizations for different uses in the holistic system. Is there what are the issues on any? Is there enough guidance out there about how the collective should use those rainfall inputs for appropriately?
Well, yes, I know it's a confusing area in some senses, because the different devolved administrations have got different guidance for Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and some of that guidance has made use of the research from the 2017 UCWIR study, for example, in Scotland, whereas the Environment Agency for England are still using values that haven't changed for peak rainfall for many years now, since research that predated UK CP18 and UK CP09. And someone asked a question in the panel about whether they've changed, the latest results have changed for England, and they have a bit. They're higher now from the guidance we've produced. But the guidance we've produced is no more than guidance. It's not new allowances that are uptaken by the regulators. So it's up to the Environment Agency, SEPA, NRW, and the authorities in Northern Ireland to make a decision as to how they want to adopt that information. And I think they're going through those processes at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that, Murray. Martin, since I did invite you to comment, it'll be wrong of me to move on without giving you an opportunity to just maybe say a few words about that, if you have anything to add.
I think a big difference between organisations with different remits is the critical duration that they need to look at. And as Murray said, the pattern's now getting more complicated, that some durations are getting a lot worse, some are staying about the same. So some organisations are probably quite relaxed, saying, well, my data says climate change isn't important, and others will be running around in circles screaming that it's vital. So I think we need to consider the critical duration that different organisations are interested in.
Okay, thank you for that. Hector, I was pretty interested in what you were saying about how the planning was done for the DWMP and how you dealt with uncertainty. But one of the things was, it seemed to focus on uncertainty around the inputs, the variables of climate change and on population. I was thinking, but also for me, another important variable is the uncertainty about solutions and how you can achieve the cost of those and how you make choices in those factors. How much was that taken into account in the adaptation approach? You're on mute, or can't hear, Hector.
Your audio's not working, Hector.
Is it now?
It is now. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Wessex Water mapped the generic options against the finite number of key tests in the model, and we considered all these interdependencies with all the different options, so the likes of acceptability, public acceptability, resilience. So when we were doing our tests on the primary and secondary solutions, up to a certain degree, all of these solutions and implications were considered as well.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to Ismail. I think you said in your presentation that your forecasts were 2 hours long, and we were given 2-hour forecast. I'm just wondering how well people can respond in 2 hours and be prepared. So once you've got the information 2 hours, what can people do in 2 hours to be ready? And I'm just wondering whether or not, thinking about other applications. I'm thinking about even applications for myself in Scotland. Could you use longer forecasts from the data to give you much more longer forecasts and get more and more certain, but take some actions a bit earlier? I'm just wondering if that's in the thinking.
Shala, would you like to tackle that?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that definitely is in the thinking, and that's an intended future development. So within the scope of this pilot, we were only able to give those short-term nowcasts to 2 hours, and it's an improvement on what BMA currently have at the moment. It's basically completely reactive. So one of the parts of the work that Ismail touched on was the improvement of their rainfall radar system. So they've made a huge investment in a really top of the range radar system, but actually all that they were getting out of it previously were images that you couldn't get any of the quantitative data from. They needed analysis, so you couldn't really functionally use those in warning. They could only really be used for post-event analysis. So a lot of the work in this phase was on bringing that rainfall estimation up to scratch and getting up to 2 hours. But yeah, certainly in the future we would be looking to extend that to give a bit more warning. But what you can do with 2 hours, at the moment, what they do when they get that, when they know that there is flooding going to happen, or when they think there's flooding going to happen, they get people ready. This means that once the people are ready, they can start to think about where they might actually be deployed with a bit more certainty.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, I'll pose a question to Alex. it looks like from your data, like, and you've demonstrated that, suds planters, things like that could be very effective in managing runoff from building roofs and the like. And what do you think are the biggest challenges, though, to get, I think there's two aspects about could we get these built into building design such that they should be part of our future buildings and somehow, but also mainly, but retrofit's going to really be key because we already have millions of buildings out there. So what are the biggest challenges for installing or getting acceptability of these things, do you think? About how could we use some of the data like you've demonstrated, for example, to encourage people to pick up the use of these and adoption of these?
Yeah, I think the main challenge is, apart from the obvious cost, there's I think I said 22 million homes. That should have been 28 million homes. If you're looking to do something on every house, it's just an astronomical cost. And the other challenge would be space availability, and we've seen that with loads of the projects we've been involved in. Not everywhere has space to put anything in, let alone anything of a decent size. So space availability, cost would be the two main challenges. Having said that, we're seeing more and more projects that are being identified for retrofit. Schools are an obvious easy ones because there's typically space available, usually large roof areas. There's usually an appetite to do something, and then you can start to tie in the engagement and the education aspect to it. So schools are an obvious area where there are opportunities. The other positive things you can look for are the public engagement side of things. So whilst there might be a cost, we've worked with 1 or 2 water companies already where they've bought planters and they've effectively given them to residents that wanted them. The problem comes in gaining acceptance from enough residents to make it worthwhile. You get some people who love to have something for nothing. You'd get some people who love to have something because it's going to do something and help out. And you get other people that just don't want anybody coming in the garden and doing anything with the house. So that's a challenge as well. It's just to get a consistent approach to be able to say deal with an area where flooding is an issue. But putting the challenges to one side, just for every challenge, there's lots of positive opportunities purely on the number of properties and locations available. You talked about new build. I think the target is to build 300,000 houses per year in the UK just to cope with current demand. We're starting to see in Wales, for instance, because it's driven by legislation, you must have some form of treatment from roof runoff. That these have been specified in at the construction phase, not on every property, obviously, and it's not, as I said before, it's not the answer in every case. But we're seeing some nice examples of, say, blocks of retirement apartments where planters have been included as the first line of the SUD solution. There'll be downstream features as well, swales, rain gardens, this sort of thing. So I don't know if that answers your question, Kieran.
No, that's good. I find that really interesting what you said is happening in Wales. That sounds very positive.
Yeah.
Another question, maybe generally, I've got, and this is maybe not for everyone, but given that we, recently we've had all the focus on, the CSO storm overflow reduction, desires to reduce, or progressively reduce, or with the public and a lot of people in the public wanting to reduce overflows, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But there's also the desire for flooding. There's still a lot of flooding going on. We got the climate impacts of the climate, and we've got ongoing development. You mentioned it yourself there at the end, Alex. Development, all these different pressures on urban drainage. Do the panel, do you think, or that urban drainage, these serviceability improvements or objectives can be delivered for net zero, or will we be relying on other parts of our industry or other parts of to help prop up the drainage element? I don't know how many people would comment on that, but Martin, maybe I'd start with you, because
yeah, I think we are going to have to look at integrated solutions where everyone contributes to reducing the impact on the drainage systems. So the work Hector's been doing for Wessex, we find that the cheapest solutions are to upsize pipes or put in new pipes, but you can only solve 10% of the problem with that. And then for the rest of the problem, you've got to use SUDS, or you've got to use attenuation storage. And the SUDS has to be done either by householders or local authorities. Storage, yes, can be the water company. So it needs everyone pulling together to solve this problem.
Yeah. Is anyone else would like to make a comment on that, or want to move on to question and answers?
I would just touch back on what I mentioned about Wales, and you know, there's quite often mention of the fact that Wales, for years we've always been talking about how Scotland are way ahead of the rest of the UK with SUDS in general. Wales seem to have stolen the march on that one, because you know they've put it into legislation. I think it's probably hurt quite a few people, because a lot of people have been made to put things in that they would have otherwise avoided. But we're definitely seeing a difference because it's legislation driven. How long that takes to have a knock-on effect remains to be seen. But I always remember that graph that I'm sure you remember, the graph that Jeremy Jones used to show. Yeah. If you don't do anything, we're in big trouble, and it's going to take us 20, 30 years to get back to where we are now by doing a lot of retrofit.
Okay, thank you. I'll just move on then to the questions posed by our audience today, and I'll try and work out who maybe they're best directed to, but if I get that slightly wrong, you might be able to help me by offering to answer. But there's one of the most popular ones here is from James Trafford, which is on receipt of flood warnings. This is for the Bangkok project. On receipt of flood warnings for Bangkok, what measures do the Bangkok authorities take to prepare, respond, and recover for these surface rainfall events?
Okay, I'll go first. So right now, for Bangkok, there's structural measures in place and non-structural measures. So there's structural measures would be like having embankments, flood walls, dikes, and they also have their drainage system. So when the flood occurs, BMA will lower the water level of the canals through pumping and get their mobile response units ready for deployment. So, but however, one issue in Bangkok is that there's a lot of rubbish blocking these drains and pumps. So in advance, so their mobile units will inspect these pumps and deploy temporary pumps while managing the traffic. So right now, at this moment, their response is very reactive, and it's very resource limited. So having that advanced warning will help target those resources. So yep, Shala.
Yeah, no, now that you answered that one, Ismail, but I guess, yeah, just sort of emphasising again how localised the rainfall is in Bangkok, and it's really flat. So being able to pinpoint where the rain is going to fall really does make a difference, especially given the traffic problems, and being able to actually get the units where they're needed in time. If any of you out there have ever been to Bangkok, you'll know that the roads are busy at the best of times, never mind when they're flooded. So it really is a concern being able to get the resources where they're needed in time at the right time. So yeah, I think Ismail touched on it quite briefly in the presentation. So we're actually working with RAB Consulting, who I'm sure a lot of you may be familiar with, who are looking at the current response procedures that BMA have and looking at how they may be adapted, taking into account this earlier warning that would be provided by the system.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's another question here. I think it'll be for Alex. I think it's great to see these types of solutions being presented. I think to the planters, as we implement these types of solutions, who's responsible for maintaining them to ensure the reduced flood risk? Is it the customer or the water company, or someone else?
Yeah, that's going to vary from project to project, obviously. But I mean, what we've seen is, for instance, that's the school that we looked at. That's entirely maintained and looked after by the school themselves. You know, I'm not sure if his official title is the caretaker, but he's basically what I would call the school caretaker. And he was involved in the work we did, so he fully understood what he was dealing with, and the kids get involved. So basically, the school looks after that one. On a property level, I mean, one of the attractions to a certain extent of that sort of approach is if property level SUDs are used, whether it's planters, rainwater butts, rain gardens, it's the householder themselves that are responsible. So on one hand, that makes it easier for the developer, if you like, to gain adoption. I guess the downside is, are they going to be looked after? Who, in 10 years' time, if they're neglected, who's going to take responsibility? I think the Welsh have covered that with the SARB approach and the legislative approach they've used, because you can't just get away with not looking after it. There's processes in place to make sure they are maintained. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's going to vary from project to project.
Okay.
The beauty of anything that's above ground, whether it's whatever sort of SUDS feature it is, it's obvious if it's not being maintained, at least.
Okay. There's a question here, probably mainly targeted at Murray. Do you think that we will move away from event severity descriptions 1 in 30 as the climate is changing rapidly? And from now on, will it be just about another climate change event? Or, and I think that's also a bit of a problem with explaining to customers about 1 in whatever, and there's 3 of them come along in a week, and they just don't get it.
Yeah, it is a problem, but what's the solution? You see, if you just say, well, it's another climate change event, if you've got no way of assessing the rarity of it, it's difficult to say, to have some benchmark that you're trying to be resilient against. So while I appreciate there's problems with the 1 in 30 and communicating that to people who might not, who say we had one of those last year, we had one the year before, you have to remember that 30-year return period is only for a point space. So you can get, and we do get 30-year events every year, almost every month somewhere in the UK. So there is a communication issue, but I do think it's going to be very difficult to get away from some measure of rarity in order to have a benchmark upon which you use to derive resilience, because we can't be resilient to say a 500,000 year event necessarily, or if we are, we need to plan for it so that it's seen as an exceedance event that we do something about. But I don't think it's very easy rather to get away from some form of return period or rarity based design index.
Okay. Is anyone else got any comment on that, or it's probably quite a general area? Want to make a comment?
I think we do have to stop using the term return period and get to annual probability of exceedance, because if we keep using return period, people will keep saying we've had one event, now there won't be another one for 30 years. We've just got to, I know it's ingrained habit to say that, but we've got to stop doing it.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you, Martin. Another question here, I think it's for Hector. Comment, super presentation. Can you give examples of what the scenarios being considered for Avonmouth were and the signals that are being used to accompany these?
Yeah, so we tried to test a green infrastructure scenario and one more traditional scenario. So let's say first SADs, ground infiltration removal, and then the likes of attenuation tanks, increased conveyance. But they were not always exclusive. But with the aim was to resolve the problem with 2 different options, 2 different solutions, I'd say, or combinations of solutions. And about the signals, well, the identification of signals is the next step, really. All I have to say is that also in line with what you've defined, what you've said before about that, to solve all these problems, we need cooperation with local authorities, water companies, etc. Probably for the identification and monitoring signals is more or less the same, because they will require strong statistical analysis to make sure that you are not just accounting for noise or things like that. The signals that could be used, that it would depend on the catchment, really. We could use, as I said, the sea level rise as one of them, the increase in precipitation intensity, but also if you're looking at the CSO, it could be a signal, could be like the number of spills per year. If you are tracking the trend year after year and you correlate that with the climate change or with the growth or anything that could impact that CSO upstream.
Okay, thank you. And there's a couple more in here for dealing with the rainfall. Let's choose one. Yeah, it's one here. It says, it will be interesting to see how the shape of the design rainfall will impact solution designs. Will they be more appropriate for assessing inherent resilience to prioritize similar proposals? Murray or Martin, maybe, or I think that's more general.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because I remember learning about the significance of storm shape in a project I did years ago in Jakarta, a similar sort of climate to Bangkok. And the issue there is if the storm shape is lagged, as at the peak is at the back end of the storm, storage stops working as well, because the storage tends to fill up before you get to the worst rainfall. Already partly full doesn't work. If the key storms are lagged to the front of the storm, then storage works really well, because you capture the peak and then you can release it during the rest of the peak. But to change the balance between storage solutions and conveyance solutions, floods, I guess, behave somewhat similar to storage. If the peak is at the back end of the storm, the ground is all wet, infiltration making these things, soil is saturated, and so it doesn't help so much. I hope that we're not heading towards storms like towards the back end, because then we're really in trouble.
What we've found so far, Martin, is that the front load, back load, and centrally balanced profiles are approximately equally distributed in the event data. So one of the things we're considering is whether it might be more robust to simulate with one of each of those, as opposed to just the currently symmetrical profile. And I appreciate that the back-loaded ones are going to create storage issues, but anyway, there's discussion to be had on that project about that point.
Yeah, it's better to know that there might be an issue than just ignore it and not look for it.
Okay, I'll take a few more before we'll need to wrap up. There's one here about can the planters be fitted with a smart control to discharge water during dry conditions to free up storage volume in the preparation for storm events? Sounds like real-time control on microsystems at the end of the. Is that possible?
That's something that we're looking at as we speak. Effectively, I mentioned the people we're working with on the monitoring and the data capture is SDS with a symbiotic system, and those of you that know about that system will be aware of the background about where some of that system came from. And there's the link with the smart control of rainwater harvesting systems as well. So predicting the weather, if it's going to rain, you can empty the tank out or empty the tank out partially. So that's something that we were hoping to look to do with the planters. Is to, I mean, we're playing around with different outlets at the moment. If you remember, I mentioned there was one with 0.05 litre per second max and one with 0.1. One thing we hope to do is to make that manageable live, if you like, but we're not there yet.
Okay, another one for looking at DWMPs. With only a primary and secondary option being designed, how are you representing that all of the generic options for DWMP are being considered?
Yeah, so all the generic options were mapped against a finite number of key tests in the model. So when which option to apply in each location will be down to the ranking of each generic option, which was mapped against each test. So at the end, you get that sort of priority list, and you ended up testing as many options as possible until you get to the two solutions.
Okay. And we'll just take maybe one more. This is one that I don't know, it may be more general for a number of people could comment on. Can water companies embed climate change thinking without the need for an external regulator? I know that's maybe quite it's an opinion for people probably, rather than if anybody wants to.
I think they're doing that already, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Whether they've been forced to do it or they're doing it of their own accord, I don't know. But you see quite a lot of the presentations we've been to over the last 2 or 3 years. We mentioned British Water before. Through British Water and Future Water, there's a lot of involvement with the water companies, and they present the way they're approaching things. And certainly some of them are taking that approach and talking about green infrastructure and climate change and having to build in these adaptations. So I'm sure they're doing it. Whether they're doing it enough is another. I keep talking about the Welsh side of things. Welsh Water seem to be well advanced on that front.
I think the regulator is moving as well. That 10 years ago, Ofwat was saying don't allow for climate change because customers aren't prepared to pay for it. 5 years ago, they were saying don't allow for reducing CSO spills because customers aren't prepared to pay for it. What are they going to be saying next week? But they'll change eventually as pressure builds. So I think Ofwat is now fully on board with climate change.
Okay, I think I'll call it a close at that. I'd like to thank, on behalf of our audience and the CIWEM UDG, all our presenters and keynotes for today for coming along and presenting and giving us excellent presentations, and then participating in the panel session at the end there. So thank you very, very much. The takeaway for me, it just reminds me that how important climate change is, and it's here now. The impacts we're going to have to take account of in our adaptation for drainage systems, but also in the way that we do that actually reduces our future contribution to the pressures of climate change going forward. And I think also the other big thing will be technology. We heard a bit about technology today and how more sophisticated methods and tools can be used to help us either plan or manage flood risk and manage our systems in a way that actually help us deal with the impacts of climate change. And I think there'll be more of that probably tomorrow and Wednesday in the presentations that follow today. We'll now be breaking for lunch, which will take place for up until 3:30. Or 13:30, should I say, 1:30. We'll be back. So please remember to stay online and mingle with others in the expo area. And that will be still going until 3 o'clock. Visit our virtual booths too for our sponsors who are here today too, and chat directly with people in the organisations working on the adaptation and resilience and meeting the net zero challenges in urban drainage management who are with us today. In the networking area, which is also open to 3 o'clock, you can also speed network with others in event attendees and connect with them instantly by accessing the networking area on the left-hand side of your Hopin platform. This function will pair you up with random people randomly and other delegates, so you can have a brief video chat or exchange contacts, whatever you'd like to do. Also in the networking area, you can click on the join button, and this system will search for someone else who has clicked the join button, and the two users will be matched instantaneously, and the video chat will begin. Each networking meeting lasts 3 minutes, so you will see a timer countdown on the top side of the screen. When the time expires, the meeting ends, and you have an option to extend or go for another one for someone else. Whilst in the network meetings, look out for the blue connect button. This will show up in the top right corner of your screen. Press connect and your contact information will be exchanged with the attendee you're having to network with. Similar to exchanging business cards at a physical event. It's quite a useful wee tool. After lunch break, we'll invite you back to the workshops and sessions. On the left-hand side, you can see them, and there's buttons for that on your screen. Today's workshop is centered around the R&D activities with the content on recently published the Integrated Urban Drainage Modelling Guidance, ongoing work updating our guidance in water quality modelling and data and collection to support the UPM Water Framework Directive studies. And most importantly, we want you our delegates to input to what the areas of research and guidance we need for the future would be most beneficial to the industry, you, our members. We will also meet in the large group session where the chair of the workshop and other members of our committee will provide you with the background to the workshop. You will then be moving into workshop groups of up to 15 people where ideas of updates and new topics and wider research and development to improve our knowledge and practical applications. And that'll take 20 minutes. And then you'll be asked to rejoin the main group for feedback and group discussion. So thanks, and we look forward to seeing you in the sessions at 1:30, and we'll just move on now. And this is a great start to what will be hopefully a great conference over the next 3 days. Bye for now.